there. Okay. Welcome everybody on this sunny morning to the League of Women Voters of the Northwoods meeting program. Today we get to learn the ins and outs of poll work and being a poll worker from our local expert, Oneida County and Crescent Town Clerk, Tracy Hartman. The League of Women Voters of the Northwoods is offering this program for 3 linked reasons. We're all interested in assuring and demonstrating the integrity and security of our voting processes. Secondly, a number of us are interested in what we can actually do as individuals to strengthen our democratic Republican form of government. And finally, and most practically, our local governmental elections are often short on volunteer poll workers. So remember the phrase, all voting is local. And remember the requirement that it's up to us to make that voting happen securely and efficiently. To give you a little of Tracy's background and credentials, first of all, she's carrying out the lifelong commitment to co-parenting 7 children. That certainly demonstrates a belief and commitment in building families and communities. It's also an undeniable source of patience and endurance, as well as organizing, nurturing, and teaching skills. Tracy and her family live in the town of Crescent. With regards to formal education, training, and service experience, Tracy received a degree in social work and upon graduation worked for the Salvation Army in St. Paul. After moving to Rhinelander in 1996, she spent 3 years working for Oneida County Social Services in the Child Protective Services Unit. She then worked for a private foster care agency for 8 years. In 2006, she was lured into running for public office for the Town of Crescent Clerk. And Tracy, please, somewhere along the line, will you share with us what and who induced you to run for public office? She was elected as the clerk, the Crescent Clerk, in April of 2007 and has been serving in that position for the last 15 years. But then on top of that, about 10 years ago, she began working towards running for county clerk in 2016. She ran successfully for that office when Mary Bartlett announced that she was not going to run for re-election as Oneida County Clerk. The town and county clerk both have many tasks. However, Tracy declares that elections are by far her favorite part of the job. She feels strongly, as she states, that elections need to be run honestly and fairly, and that every resident should have the opportunity to vote. Electing the officials that run the towns, counties, state, and federal government is an extremely important right that every citizen should participate in. That's quoting Tracy. So Tracy, the virtual podium is yours.
Perfect. Well, thank you very much for inviting me to speak on this topic. So I will answer Dorothy's question about what lured me into running for government. And I will be honest that initially what lured me into it was that I had 5 little ones at home, and running for county or town clerk gave me the opportunity to work from home. So initially it was purely selfish. It gave me the opportunity to stay home with them and work from my home. So I ran for town clerk and won that election. And once I got started in it, my husband and I have always been involved politically, just in voting. But then when I got to see elections on the other side, I found that I really enjoy that. I really like working with that. I enjoy working with my town board and my county board and the other tasks, but elections are by far my favorite aspect of both of my jobs. And so that was where I ended up, and then moved towards running for the county clerk's office. So that's a little bit about myself. Yes, I do have 7 children. I am slightly insane, as some people like to say. They range in age from the youngest being 2 12-year-old twins all the way up to a 22-year-old. So now I will get started on becoming a poll worker. So real quick for everybody out there, I'm trying to watch the chat. So if you have a question, do not hesitate to shoot a message, or you know, if it's something about what I'm talking about, feel free to unmute yourself and jump in and ask any questions. At the end, we'll open it up again for questions. And I believe there's a couple of poll workers that are also attending on the Zoom. You know, so if you're out there and I say something and you wanna jump in and say something else from your experience as a poll worker, please feel free to do that. So give me a moment. I'm going to share my screen. I just need to find my little button to do it. There we go. Okay, so hopefully you are seeing my screen now. If you aren't, please feel free to shout out, but otherwise I'm going to assume everybody can see it. So being a poll worker. So before I get into the nuts and bolts of it, poll workers are so vitally important to our elections. I don't think I can stress enough how important our poll workers are. We'll talk about the duties that they perform in a couple of minutes, but really election day does not happen without our poll workers. And so, you know, we have an amazing group in Oneida County. Poll workers, it's up to each town to appoint their poll workers. So that's managed at the town level. But we have some amazing people that work in our polls here in Oneida County. So if you're out there and you are a poll worker, thank you so much. So becoming a poll worker. So to be a poll worker, very similar with your need to, or your ability to vote. You have to be a US citizen. You have to be 18 years old. However, in Wisconsin, we do have the ability for high schoolers to be poll workers. They have some different rules, but you know, they can be poll workers, but if you're not a high schooler, you need to be 18 years old. State statute says you have to be able to read and write fluently in the English language. You cannot be a candidate for any office that's going to be voted on. That doesn't mean you can't be a candidate for an office that isn't being voted on. So if you serve in an elected capacity, you can work at every election except for the ones that you're on the ballot. But if you're on the ballot, then you're not able to be at the polling location working. You have to be a qualified elector of the county where you live. It used to be that you had to be a qualified elector of the municipality that you lived in order to work in that election. That changed. We were seeing difficulty for some municipalities to get poll workers. So the state legislators changed that, and now you just have to reside in the county where you're going to be working. However, chief election inspector, which we'll talk about what that is in a moment, but a chief election inspector has to be a qualified elector of the town where the polling place is located. Poll workers are appointed by the town chair, city mayor of the municipality for a 2-year term. So if you're going to be a poll worker, they ask that you make that 2-year commitment. And now on to the responsibilities of a poll worker. So, and these duties change a little bit. Every municipality runs some of their polling sites a little bit differently, but the main duties that a poll worker is assigned to conduct are on election day, issuing ballots to registered voters. If you've been to a polling location, you know that it's not just, the ballot isn't just handed to you. You have to show a photo ID, and those poll workers are verifying that the photo ID is who it says it's for, and that that's who's registered in their polling book. So there's a process that they're going through with verifying the voter, verifying it against the polling book, and then making sure that that voter signs the poll book before they hand them their ballot. So Issuing ballots sounds like a simple process, but it's actually a little bit lengthy, and there's a lot of responsibility involved in that to make sure that statutorily the voters are meeting the requirements they need to meet. Poll workers register voters. Not every poll worker handles the registration. Most municipalities will have a poll worker that has been trained in that, in what's needed to be a registered voter and completing that, the registration form. But the poll workers are registering voters. They monitor the voting equipment. Every town hall or every polling location has to have some form of voting equipment. Every location has to have voting equipment for handicapped voters, ADA accessible voting equipment. So they're making sure that that's working throughout the day, that there's no glitches, nothing's going on with that. They work with the voter on explaining how to mark their ballot or how to use the voting equipment. We really want to make sure that the voter understands what they're doing with that ballot. They don't give them advice on who to vote for. They don't talk about the candidates, but we want to make sure that they're marking their ballot correctly so that their vote does count, that at the end of the day, there isn't an error on that. So they're helping the voter explain that. And then they close the election. They count the votes at the end of the night and they close the election. In today's day and age, with our voting machines, it's not like it used to be where they're actually hand counting all the ballots. But when they push that button on that voting machine and it tallies all the votes, ultimately it's their responsibility to make sure that what the voting machine is saying the vote totals are is accurate. So they're going to check it. They're going to make sure nothing seems off. They're going to go through every single ballot and make sure that the voting machine pulled any write-ins out. They're going to reconcile their poll books. You know, if you've gone in, you know there's 2 poll books. At the end of the night, both of those poll books have to have the same number of voters, every voter has to have the same voter number assigned to them. So at the end of the night, those poll workers are going through and checking that, making sure that everything they have done throughout the day is accurate and that those numbers equal what they need to equal so that we don't have anyone saying that our votes are wrong. So that is what a poll worker does on election day. Now, like I said, some municipalities do things a little bit differently. So there's other positions that a municipality may have. If some of you have gone to some towns in Oneida County, Pine Lake being one of them, they have a greeter that stands at the door and they help you figure out what table you need to go to so that you aren't wandering around and going to the wrong tables. They also answer any questions. So some towns have greeters. Like I said before, some have a registration official that does all the registrations. And then there's the chief election inspector. So in the state of Wisconsin, every municipality has to have a chief election inspector. And this is the lead election official at the polling location. That person has more training than the rest of them. They're actually required by law to have 6 hours of training every 2 years. There's certain trainings that they have to take so that they know exactly what needs to be happening at that polling location. So every polling location has at least one. Some will pull in 2, some do split shifts with them, but you have to have a chief election inspector there at all times. Hours of work, so it varies a little bit. The polling location statutorily opens at 7 a.m. and has to stay open till 8 p.m. A lot of municipalities, because poll workers are difficult to find, they will have their poll workers work the entire day. So I know in Crescent, poll workers show up between 6:15 and 6:30 a.m. I've been in there before that and I have it all set up, and my chief election inspector comes in with me early and we make sure everything's set up. But they come in at 6:15, 6:30, get their spots set. And depending on the election, they will work until 9 p.m. at night. Some elections a little bit later, some a little bit earlier. Some municipalities will do split shifts. If they have enough workers, they'll split it half a day. In Crescent, we have about half of our poll workers that work a split shift, and then we have the other half work the full day. Partly that's because they like to do it. They like to say hi to everybody they know. They like to chat with everybody in the community, so they enjoy working that day. But some of them like the split shift. Are poll workers compensated? So yes, poll workers are paid. The pay is set by the municipality that you're a poll worker in, so it varies. You get paid typically an hourly rate. However, I have heard there's some towns that do a per diem, and so it's one rate for the entire day. The rate is set by the governing body of that municipality, so the town board or city council would set that. And then some municipalities will compensate you for training. So it just depends. Every town kind of runs the pay a little bit differently, but they are compensated. There are poll workers that will notify their clerk that they don't want to be compensated. They want that to be a volunteer position, and that is something that is acceptable. So training requirements for poll workers. So poll workers do receive and are required to receive training every 2 years. So they're appointed for a 2-year term, and during that 2-year term, they're expected to get training. Now, the poll workers are not, there's not a set number of training that they have to receive or set hours. It's up to the municipal clerk to provide that training and to kind of figure out what they're willing to or what they're able to do. You know, some towns in Oneida County, it's every year a full day training to re-go over everything. Some towns, they do an every other year training. You know, this year would be the year they would do it leading up to the big elections to just remind everybody of the rules and let them know of any changes. But it's up to the municipal clerk to take care of that training and to schedule that training and provide that. The one difference to that training is the chief election inspector, who is required to attend the 6 hours of training every other year. There are certain trainings they have to take through the Wisconsin Elections Commission. If the clerk wavers from that training, they have to get approval from the Wisconsin Elections Commission to change up the training that that chief election inspector is going to have. So that's the one difference. That's the one poll worker that gets a set training. How are poll workers selected? So as I've stated, the mayor, town board chair is the one who appoints them. Typically, they will appoint them based upon the recommendation of the town clerk. So the town clerks, you know, are the ones who kind of recruit those poll workers. We'll get to a different situation in a moment, but so typically it would be a list that the town clerk would provide to that mayor or town board chairperson. Poll workers are appointed every other year. They're typically appointed in December of the odd numbered years, and then they serve for the even and the odd number year 2 years. So, but as I said, there's a different situation where poll workers can be appointed. They're appointed by the board, but the nominees come from a list that's given to the town by the two political parties, which in this case would be Democrat and Republican parties. Those parties can submit a list to the town clerk no later than November 30th of those odd numbered years. And the lists that are provided by those two political parties are where the town board has to pull the poll workers from first. We have to do that. And then the leading party, that's not the word I'm looking for, they have the more number of the poll workers. So if there's 7 poll workers, and you know the Democrat Party is the governor at that point in time, then there would be 4 Democrat poll workers and 3 Republican. That is only if the political parties submit a list to their local municipality. If they do not, then the board goes back to the list that the clerk has, and that is where they will appoint poll workers. In Oneida County, typically our 2 parties have not provided a list to the municipal clerks. I haven't spoken with the president of the Democrat Party recently about this, but I had spoken with the Republican Party recently because the state sent out a letter to all town clerks. But in the past, historically, both political parties in Oneida County felt comfortable with the poll workers that the town clerks had been appointing. Like I said, we have an amazing group of poll workers. We have a great group of 20 other town clerks other than myself that do just a very good job of making sure that the elections are fair, that the poll workers are not biased and are not doing anything unethical or illegal. So historically, we have not received those lists from our political parties in Oneida County. And then finally, the last type of, and this is not a poll worker, but I wanted to bring this one up because it has been in the news recently, if you have been watching. There is another election worker that is appointed by the town clerk, and they're called special voting deputies. So special voting deputies are, like I said, appointed by the municipal clerk. They conduct absentee voting at care facilities. They can also, town clerks can ask them to do it at assisted living facilities. So those are the workers that will go into the care facility and help conduct absentee voting. Now, if you watch the news, you've heard that in the 2020 election, Wisconsin Elections Commission had recommended that clerks not send special voting deputies into care facilities, and it's caused quite the drama. So I wanted to point this position out because it does perform a very, very vital function in elections. They go in and they help people in care facilities make sure that their vote gets in, because obviously they're not always able to go to the polling location. So a special voting deputy must be a qualified elector, just like a poll worker of the county. They have set training. They have to attend every 2 years. They cannot be employed by the facility that they are going into. They can't have been employed by that facility within the last 2 years, and they can't have an immediate family member in that facility. So they go in and they basically perform an election at the facility. That's a simple way of saying it because it's really not, but they go in and they help the residents of that facility that are able to vote, and then they help them fill out their absentee ballot envelope, and they sign off on it, and then they bring that back and deliver that to the municipal clerk. So that was the other election worker that I wanted to discuss. So that is, in a nutshell, our poll workers. Does anybody have any questions about the information that I've given? So there was a comment in chat. I don't know if you're all looking at that. It's from a poll worker, and the poll worker says, from my perspective as a poll worker, it would ease the process on the day of election. Absentee ballot counting used to be a minor part of the job, and now it's a bigger deal, and it creates challenges for the poll worker. Absolutely. I'll give you some numbers from Crescent. I can remember my first presidential election as the Crescent town clerk, and we have in Crescent, we have approximately, I want to say 1,800 registered voters. And my first presidential election, we got 52 absentee ballots. And I wouldn't say overwhelmed, but I was shocked at how many absentee ballots I was sending out, because it was a large number for me for a presidential election. And during the last presidential election in 2020, I believe I sent out, by the end, it was 470 something. So this poll worker is absolutely correct. You know, from 2020 on, the absentee ballot requests have skyrocketed. We definitely are seeing them more, and it creates a lot of extra work on election day. It creates a lot of extra work for the municipal clerks. I will say with that, there are some town clerks, as I'm talking about duties of poll workers, that pull in their poll workers to help with that absentee process prior to election day. I know the city of Rhinelander's poll workers, a number of them go in and help stuff those envelopes and get those ballots sent out to everybody. But it definitely creates extra work on election day and has created some challenges within the polling location. So, any other questions?
Tracy, I have one along those lines.
Yes.
Are there other improvements that we can make in any aspect of the voting process that you and the polling workers notice from down there at the site, on the polling place, because now the League of Women Voters is all about getting out the vote, educating voters, and promoting efficient, accessible voting. So you want to give any extra pitch there that we should work on?
Oh boy. That's a big question, and I'd have to give that some thought. I will be honest and say my initial thought is if they would stop changing all the laws every other day, that would really help us. You know, and you see it in the news, and it's both political parties. Every time something ticks them off, they come back and want to change some part of the process. You know, I personally feel like in Wisconsin, we have a good process for our elections. I spent, after the November 2020 election, I would say, hours on the phone with voters, convinced that our election had been stolen in Wisconsin. And I'd walk through the laws and what these poll workers have to do, but what clerks have to do leading up to the election, after the election, with the voting machines, explaining that, you know, especially in Oneida County, we are so very lucky with who we have running our elections, but the laws that are followed in, you know, in this Oneida County, that I think our elections are honest in Oneida County. But I'll have to think through that, Dorothy, and send you an email. We did have a question. Oh,
yeah, but what you said is useful, and it's telling us that least change principle that the Supreme Court invoked as far as the new redistricting maps could equally, if not more usefully, be applied to the election rules.
Absolutely, and I think it gets. Okay, so I'm going to start off by saying, so you're all aware, I am a Republican. I ran as a Republican. I'm not overly happy with the Republican Party at this moment with elections. I think it gets dangerous when you start trying to push through election change because of something that you view didn't benefit your political party. And some of the election changes that are being pushed through are hastily being pushed through, and we have some good election laws. I think we have some great election laws, and if the clerks and the poll workers follow them, our elections are fair in Wisconsin. That doesn't mean that as things change in the world, and you know, as COVID came up, that we saw some struggles and things needed to be tweaked. I think that's never a bad thing to relook at things, but to do an overhaul of the election system is dangerous to me because we have some good practices in place. So we did have a couple questions here. So we have a question: what is the status of drop boxes? So I believe it was the Supreme Court recently, it was not, it was a county district judge, recently ordered that drop boxes not be used. The only location that drop boxes are allowed to be used at this point in time is at the municipal clerk's office when the municipal clerk is present. So, you know, there will not be any drop boxes offered where you can just, you know, drive up to your municipal clerk's office and drop them if they are not there. You know, I know in Crescent, for example, because I work out of my home, so I'm not home during the day because I'm here. I had a locked drop box during the 2020 elections. That will not be there for my voters because I am not there to man that drop box. So drop boxes, you know, will not be available unless it is manned during the day. Somebody said, what do I think about the controversy surrounding Dominion voting machines? Hallelujah. So a little history of Oneida County. Oneida County, up until 2021, used Insight voting machines. The majority of municipalities use the Insight, which was the one you could slide your ballot into. Most of that would be what you voted on, and you had to connect the arrow on the ballot. There were a few small municipalities in Oneida County that used only the Edge, which was the touchscreen voting machine, but most of them used the Insight. The one exception to that was the Town of Enterprise. In 2020, all municipalities in Oneida County were notified by our provider, Command Central, that maintains our machines, that they would no longer be maintained, and they needed to go to a different machine. We researched it, and all of Oneida County now uses either the Dominion ICE machine or the Dominion ICX. We have a few that are switching over to them, hopefully for the April election. So now to my opinion on the Dominion voting machine. So in Oneida County, our machines are not connected to the internet. They cannot be hacked. They are not connected to the internet. They do not ever connect to the internet, and they do not ever modem results to us. There are a number of municipalities in Wisconsin that do use the modem on both the Dominion and the ES&S machine. I think that there was a lot of focus on Dominion, but ES&S, which is the other large machine that's used in Wisconsin, really work off of the same principles of how they work. I think it was a little unfair the way Dominion was picked on during that election, as all voting machines have the similar concerns, if you're going to call them concerns. Our machines are not connected to the internet. In Wisconsin, and one thing I think people don't realize that happens in Wisconsin is, first of all, we are required to keep the paper ballot trail for 22 months after an election. So if there is a concern within an election result, or you have questions about it, the paper trail for those ballots are kept for 22 months. I have an entire room of ballots still from November 2020 that are sealed. They were sealed on election night, and they have not been opened. They have not been touched. They were locked in a room, and that's where they've been sitting. In Wisconsin, that's maintained in every municipality for 22 months. On top of that, in Wisconsin, after a general election that includes a federal office, so our November 2020s and then the April presidential primary, the state of Wisconsin does a random audit of at least one municipality in every county. And in the larger counties, they pull a number of different reporting units. But in Oneida County, we usually get one municipality that is randomly chosen. They're chosen after the election, so they don't know going into the election that they're going to be chosen. So that way, if they're going to screw with something, they don't know they're being chosen. And then after the election, they're randomly audited, and they have to come in to my office, and we go through and we hand count their votes. And then we have to verify that their ballots, hand counted, equal what the machine did at the end of the night. And if it doesn't, we will spend hours going through trying to figure out why that may have happened and looking at it. In 2020, the town of Sugar Camp was the lucky one that got to come in and hand count all their ballots. And there was, I think, a discrepancy, if I remember, of one vote. And we had a ballot that the person, the machine had counted it, but it was obviously not a vote. It was a mark on the ballot. It wasn't a mark that the voter would have caused, and the machine looked at it incorrectly. So we were able to explain away why that was off by one vote, but it was only off by one vote. So we have a good process in Wisconsin of verifying that our election results are accurate. Like I said, I did spend a number of hours after the 2020 election trying to calm people down about the voting machines. There are some people who still don't like me, but one thing that we have decided in my office to do is we will be doing a random audit after the Board of Canvass is done on two voting boards, two voting reporting units in Oneida County for every election. And so we will do a similar to what they do after the federal election, where we will hand count two reporting units. Since Oneida County did recently switch to the ICE machine, and I understand, people's concerns that are hearing these reports, we want to make sure that we show them that in Oneida County, our machines are working correctly. So did that answer the question? I think it was Tom Giroux that asked that. Tom, did I answer that?
Yeah, thank you. It's just you know, after I thought the Dominion machines worked perfectly and much better than our old machine, which often we had difficulty reconciling to.
Yeah.
And the other thing, there's a lot of people think that it can print a ballot, but it really takes 2 election officials to unlock that device to allow a handicapped person to be able to use the device. And so it just can't decide on its own to print a ballot.
Absolutely. And we did have, and I think Lake Tomahawk Chief's election inspector might actually be on here. Lake Tomahawk had some concerns about that very issue, Tom, that you were talking about. And so what Lake Tomahawk has opted to do is they will have the ICE voting machine for anybody who's voting on a ballot, filling in the oval and inserting it. But if somebody needs to be able to use the touchscreen function of the machine, they've actually gone and purchased the ICX, which is the touchscreen voting machine, so that they will have that separate, because they were concerned about that. And, you know, in Crescent, I'm not, you know, Tom, I agree with you, but they were concerned, and there are options to help alleviate those concerns of voters. And I think it's important that municipal clerks, town boards, listen to those concerns, you know. So I think it was great that Lake Tomahawk came up with the solution that their voters were happy with, because it's important that our voters are confident that what we're doing is correct. But I absolutely agree. I think Dominion really got some negative publicity that was unwarranted. You know, I had a voter after November send me a screenshot from some bogus report about how our votes switched from election night to when we did our Board of Canvass. It's not true. Our votes did not switch between election night and Board of Canvass. And this person was saying that our machines had been hacked, and you could see through the IP address that they were hacked, and which I chuckled, because in Oneida County, they're never connected to the internet. But as I said, what was reported on election night is what their tape showed when they brought it into us, and that tape is printed on election night. So what the report they had was not accurate. It was a complete lie. And so I had to go back and forth with them about that, because I do believe our machines are very secure.
A question for you, Tracy.
Yes.
About hand delivering absentee ballots to the municipal clerk. I'm sure you're probably familiar with that memo by the Wisconsin Counties Association that gave their interpretation regarding drop boxes and all that for the upcoming spring election. And if I understood it correctly, technically, each person, only the elector, can hand deliver their ballot to the clerk. So in other words, a couple who's married, one cannot deliver both ballots to a clerk. Could you speak to that? And it just sounds kind of crazy, but
yeah.
Is
so
that be enforced?
Yeah, I mean, so I did read the Wisconsin Counties Association memo. I think it came out Friday, if I recall. I was out of my office when it came through, so I was reading on my phone, so I didn't read all of it. But yes, my understanding, both from their memo and from the ruling that came from the judge, was that the interpretation of the law is that only the voter that voted the ballot can deliver the absentee ballot. You know, and I know they've talked about ballot harvesting, and, you know, in Crescent at least, you know, I didn't have anybody driving around picking up 30 ballots. You know, it was a husband and wife. It was a daughter who ran to mom's house, and mom couldn't get out, and mom wanted it brought to me. But unfortunately, my understanding is, yes, with that new ruling, only the voter can hand deliver their ballot to the municipal clerk. Otherwise, it needs to be put in the mail and brought by mail.
Thank you.
Let's see here. Okay. I want to make sure I'm not missing anything. Let's see your drop boxes.
I just have one comment to confirm what Tracy said. I'm a poll worker in Vilas County, and we have been using Dominion machines for several years, and they definitely are not connected to the internet, nor can they be. So I just wanted to let people know that as well.
Yes. Yeah, they're a great machine. I do want to add too, you know, because I actually just had a county board member in here Friday grilling me about our machines. And I love the healthy debates that they have with me. But, you know, I pointed out to him that, so in Oneida County, we have a company called Command Central. They're the ones that actually maintain our machines. It is not Dominion. Dominion does not, once we purchase the machine from them, Dominion does not come in and do much to our machine. It is Command Central. And then Command Central in Oneida County, and I believe in Vilas County, they also use Command Central, if I recall. But Command Central is who programs those machines. And they have been a company that have been programming our machines in Oneida County for close to 15 years, even before it was the Dominion ICE machine, the Insight machine, and then the predecessor to that, which was the Eagle. They have been programming our machines for close to 15 years, and we have never had a concern with Command Central. You know, so I really, in Oneida County, believe our elections are very secure. So do I have suggestions for getting younger voters interested in voting? That is a great question. I think getting our younger voters interested in voting is so important. You know, I think one of the ways to do that, and I haven't done it as much as I would like to do it, because teachers want to talk about elections around elections, and that's an extremely busy time for me. But I think going into our schools and explaining to these kids at a young age what elections are and what their positives are. You know, I did do when my youngest were in 4th grade, we set up a mock election, and I helped them create a voter registration, and we had fun with it and created photo IDs for them and walked through the process. But then, you know, they got to nominate who was going on their ballot, and they got to, you know, we did the ballots, and we closed out the election, and they got to help figure out those votes and what was going to happen. And it was so important to them to see what that election is, and not just to see the extremely boring commercials that show up on TV every 2 years, to know that there's more to it than that. And then we talked about the importance and what their vote was doing for them. You know, so I think it's important for us to get into those schools and talk to those kids. You know, once they reach 18, getting the younger vote out, just helping to educate them, get some information out to them. And in this day and age on social media, it's so easy to get to them, but making sure that we're getting that information of how they vote and how to register. You know, my kids are in that age. I have 2 that can vote, and 1 actually that just turned 18 this week that can vote. You know, but as we've talked to our kids about voting, and they of course know how important it is, it's amazing how many of their friends don't know how to do it, and so just choose not to. And so I think explaining that to them and getting that information out to them is so important.
I can't think of any more memorable or influential tactic than for a child growing up to just be instilled with the necessity of voting, than to work on a school project with your mom, the clerk.
Yes. Yeah, we had a blast, and they had an amazing teacher that let me come in and do that. You know, and that's something that I want to work on. And I've talked to teachers about it. Like I said, they always want to do it around elections. That is not a good time for me. But I actually have a group of 20 students coming in this Friday, and I'm bringing in my voting machine from Crescent because we can do a test ballot on it. And so we're bringing it in, and they're going to get to vote for, I think Theodore Roosevelt is on their ballot, and there's some other, you know, historical presidents on there. And we're going to talk through again that process, and they're going to get to see what their parents do on election day. And I think that's important for kids to understand what that process is. Let's see. Okay, so then somebody said, can I tell you something about poll watchers and partisan poll watchers? Yes, so on election day, you can be an election observer. Anybody can do that. Around the bigger elections, obviously the 2 political parties tend to send poll watchers in and observers in, but anybody can be an election observer. Election observers can go in, they can sit all day. They can sit for part of a day. They have to sit, I don't have my manual in front of me, so I'd have to look at it. I think it's 6 feet behind or within 6 feet of the table where the poll books sit. They're not allowed to interfere in the election, but they are allowed to observe it. And observers are extremely important. I think it's important to have them in there. I know poll workers sometimes get frustrated because you feel like you're under a microscope, but it is important to have that oversight and to have, you know, somebody watching and keep you on your toes. So I hope that answered your question, Carolyn. If it didn't, feel free to unmute yourself and ask me if you would like me to delve into that a little bit more. So I think that's all.
That's good. Thanks, Tracy. But do you have experience with that? Do you see poll watchers in Oneida County?
Yeah.
That's all I wondered if.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, thank you. Yeah.
So we do see that. You know, I'll tell you in Crescent before, and this was, I think, at an April election, we actually have a gentleman in Crescent, and he hasn't been doing it recently, but almost every election he comes in, brings a book and sits and reads a book behind my poll workers. And then something will happen, and when there's nobody in the polling location, he will question them and say, can you explain, why did you do that? And, you know, and I've heard from other clerks that they do that. Now at the August and November election, especially a presidential election, I would say almost every municipality has a poll watcher in there at some point in time. I know both parties, I believe, during the November 2020 had people going out, and they may sit in one municipality for a few hours and go to another, but we definitely see that in Oneida County, probably not as extensively as obviously the larger municipalities and cities see it, where they have numerous people in there all day long, but we do have that in Oneida County. And like I said, I think it's a great thing to have happen, and it keeps us as clerks and poll workers on our toes and make sure we're aware of what we're supposed to be doing.
And I'll just interject that the League of Women Voters has an active election observer program. And we encourage anybody who's not working as a poll worker, first you ought to be a poll worker, but if you're not, to be an observer. And they do just that. They sit at the polling place, and they have a form that they fill out that facilitates evaluation of the process. And those reports are collated and reported on and so forth. And we use them to report to submit a report to the Wisconsin Election Commission. So that's just the League's modus operandi with regarding poll observers.
And I would say with that too, if you're an observer and you observe something that is concerning, you know, you're not supposed to interfere with the election, and depending on how busy it is, it might not be something that you can hop up and talk to the chief election inspector at that moment. But definitely, you know, if you aren't able to address it with them at that moment, to contact the municipal clerk of that polling location. You know, none of us, and our biggest fear is getting a call saying, hey, your poll workers were screwing up, or hey, something happened that wasn't right. None of us want to see that happen. And so if you see a concern, please call us. And sometimes it's not that the poll worker's doing anything wrong or that they're actually violating anything. There's an education that goes on the other side where there's a perception maybe of what's supposed to be happening, and that's not accurate. So, you know, please do not hesitate, or, you know, if you don't get a hold of the municipal clerk and you want to call me, you know, I can always pass on the concern, but I can help walk through any concern that there might be.
And again, the policy of the League is that as a poll observer, if you see something, say something to the person in charge. And only as a very last resort do you call the election hotline, the booth of lawyers sitting somewhere in Madison or something. And I would say that hardly ever happens, because the clerks and inspectors in charge are very knowledgeable and respectful and receptive.
So I had a question: what concerns you most about keeping elections fair, respected, and accessible? And can the League of Women Voters help? Wow, that's a deep question. You know, I think this is going to sound really bad coming from a politician. I think politicians concern me the most about keeping elections fair, respected, and accessible. You know, as I said, I think each political party, when something doesn't go their way, tends to try to figure out how they can sway the election for themselves. And that's concerning to me. That should not play a part, regardless of how you feel the election should have ended. Yeah, I think the self-interest groups that want to see an election come out a certain way, that kind of stick their noses into how the clerk is running the pre-election, post-election, the poll workers are running it, are concerning. You know, I was talking to my kids. We were listening to a news story about the Gableman report that came out a week ago, and we were talking through some of that, and we were talking through what had happened at some polling locations at the November election. And one of my littler ones said, "Mom, you know, we have rules in school against bullies. They should put some rules against bullies in elections." And I think that was hilarious at the moment. I chuckled over her, but I think that's true. I think some of our groups, and I'm not saying our as in us, but there are groups out there that want to sway the election and do not hesitate to bully our poll workers and our clerks into doing something that they maybe feel isn't right. And that probably concerns me the most. And I've seen that happen. And as clerks, it's important that we have the strength to know what our rules are and say, no, we're not going to do something that we know is wrong. No, Jane, if that answers your question.
It does. Thank you.
Tracy, can you hear me?
Yes, absolutely.
This is Stephen Schreier. I, as probably the only other elected official on this besides Tracy, I started working the polls right at the beginning of the pandemic when there was a pretty strong need. We had a fair amount of elderly poll workers who did not feel at all comfortable working the polls in person, understandably at the time. I stepped up, as did Tom, and you know, we've worked the polls ever since. And to be quite honest, aside from actually running for elected office, I think working the polls is probably the most fundamentally civic thing I've ever been involved in. And I would just like to point out that as intimidating as it may be because of the amount of responsibility that you have as a poll worker, you know, we were never paired with another neophyte. We were always paired with a person who knew how to work the polls, knew how to record in the books, knew how to answer questions, things like that. So it's not like you just get thrown in, you know, into the deep water and are expected to figure this all out on your own. You have very capable people there who've probably worked polls for years and years helping you. And it's been a very rewarding experience. And frankly, I mean, I would love to work polls in April, but unfortunately that's not going to happen because I'm on the ballot. Maybe if I can get another township or somebody to find a need or a use for me, that I'll be able to do that. But I just want to put that out there that you don't be intimidated, you know, by the process, because it really, the process is there for a reason. And I just don't think any clerk or any other poll worker or chief inspector would ever let somebody kind of just sit there and flounder and find their way.
I got a quick comment. This is Al Drum. I'm from the town of Presque Isle in Vilas County. We're pretty small. We have no voting machines, just the counting device at the end. And having worked, my wife and I have worked the polls since just before the pandemic hit. And I think we've gotten a good smattering of what it's like to work a poll at the grassroots level. And I'm now convinced when I talk to people who think they have a way that some election in some precinct or in some state could have been swung by, let's use the big word, malfeasance. That's telling me they don't understand how polling places work and how precincts work. In order, even for somebody in the town of Presque Isle with something like 650 only registered voters, to perpetrate some kind of a fraud past the mixed group of poll workers that we all are, would be virtually impossible, and not even virtually, it would be simply impossible. You might be able to impersonate somebody who died 3 days ago and get away with it. Maybe, probably not in our town because everybody knows everybody else. But when I hear people saying that there is probably widespread voter fraud, that tells me they do not understand how all these thousands of precincts throughout the country work. So that's just my 2 cents.
Alan, that's 2 cents that's worth at least a silver dollar. Is hearing you speak, what you say and how you say it makes it pretty darn clear that no fraudulent activity is going to sneak by you and your wife working as you work the polls.
It's not going to sneak by anybody.
Yeah.
Any other questions or any other poll workers on here that wanna jump in and say anything?
I'm Kay Hopp. I'm sorry I was late. I had an unexpected thing this morning. I work in Flambeau, and I don't know if at the beginning did you talk about how you handle absentee votes in Oneida County? Opening the absentee votes?
So we did not go through the process. I definitely can go through the process of counting absentee ballots. We talked briefly about the increase in absentee ballots since COVID hit, and just the extra work that we're seeing from that, but definitely, I know I've had people concerned about the security of absentee votes and how do you know some poll workers not going to change an absentee vote? So I will, real quickly walking through the process, so as a town clerk, the absentee ballots are returned to me. I'm the one that sends them out and I'm the one that gets them back. When they come back to me, I double check that there's certificate envelope. I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with what an absentee envelope looks like, but there's a certificate that has to be filled out. I double check, make sure that that's correct, so that if it isn't correct, I can get a hold of the voter and we can correct, anything so that their vote does count. Those ballots are then locked up and they are not touched from the time they get to me until the time I deliver them to the polling location. On election day, poll workers should be looking at the absentee envelope and making sure that it has not been messed with, opened, nothing has been changed on it. And then they will take that envelope, they will compare it to the poll book to make sure that this person is indeed in the poll book, and they will assign that voter a number. Now, some municipal clerks do some of the numbering ahead of time. So if you're in a larger municipality, Crescent is one of them. I've done a little bit of this process ahead of time to help alleviate some of that work at the polling location. But the poll workers will still compare that envelope. 2 of them will look and make sure that it is correct and it has not been opened. They will make sure that person is in the poll book. And then 2 poll workers will open the ballot, the envelope, take the ballot out and feed it into the machine. With that, if the machine then kicks that ballot out for some reason, you will have 2 poll workers that will look at that ballot, figure out what's wrong with it, why isn't the machine able to read it. Sometimes it's a simple matter of a fold on the ballot interfered with the machine being able to accept it, and they can fix it without actually doing anything with that ballot. But sometimes it's that the voter mismarked their ballot. You know, a lot of times they circle instead of connect the arrow for the oval. They circle. We've had people draw an arrow pointing at the name they want to vote on. Obviously, the machines cannot count that. They don't recognize that. And so then 2 poll workers will recreate that ballot. And there's a process to that. And it's not just a simple matter of, you know, they just quick connect the arrow or fill in the oval. They have a process they have to follow. And on that ballot itself, they have to mark down, you know, this is original ballot, and they have to assign it a number, original ballot 1. And then when they remake the ballot, they have to call it remade ballot 1. And those original ballots have to be kept. They have to be put in an envelope. They have to be kept with the official ballots at the end of the election, so that if there's a question, we can, as Board of Canvass after the election, pull both of those out to see that the poll worker was honest and they did it correctly. And then they will insert the remade ballot into the machine. So it is an extremely lengthy process to count these ballots, and an extremely honest process, because there are multiple people involved, you know, so much like the gentleman said, you know, about you'd have to not only get it past one poll worker, you know, there's multiple poll workers that are watching people in the polling location, and they're not going to let their fellow poll worker do something that's wrong. So yes.
Thank you. That's the comment that I get most of the time, is the fraud comes with absentee ballots that clerks have said they, you know, people requested them for every election, and then they came in and voted anyway. So somebody else used that extra ballot and so on. And I have tried to explain to them that when that's numbered, you couldn't vote twice. And I also tried to explain, I'm so glad you did, about recording the sort of episode in the ballot.
Yes.
People that I've talked with were totally unaware of that. So thank you for that clear explanation of it. Yeah. My clerk has 2, one from each party, and they are at a different table. She brings them 10 absentee ballots at a time, and they do it. So she just has 2 people only doing absentee. Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. And I want to back up on that, because you made an excellent comment there. I want to make sure to explain that about people, you know, a ballot is sent and then they come in to vote, and you have this random ballot floating around out there that somebody's going to use. So when you request an absentee ballot, the clerk marks that down. And so, you know, if I request an absentee ballot, you know, it would be marked in my absentee ballot log, and then it should also be marked in the poll book. And so if I then go into on election day to vote, in the poll book, it will say Tracy Hartman, and then next to my name where I would normally sign, it should say absentee ballot, which will prompt those poll workers to say, whoa, hang on a minute, Mrs. Hartman, you requested an absentee ballot. And there's a process to that, and they have to ask them, did you vote that ballot? Did you mail that ballot back in? And there is a way that I can still vote at the polls if I have not returned the ballot, if I did not vote it, you know, for whatever reason I decided, oh, I'm not comfortable voting absentee and I threw it away. I can still vote at the polls, but then my name now has my signature. And so if somebody comes in with that absentee ballot or it's sent in, it does not get counted. I mean, so there's multiple ways that we check back and forth and that we make sure that somebody is not voting twice. The other thing to note is that the ballot for each municipality only works in that municipality. So, you know, if there's 10 ballots floating out there, let's say for Crescent, we're checking to make sure somebody doesn't bring in extra ballots, but they can't take the ballot somewhere else. It doesn't work anywhere else. And it says it's Town of Crescent, but the machine won't read it. You know, I've heard people say, well, what if they just slide an extra ballot in? it can't be read anywhere but in the town that that ballot was created for. So it would be extremely difficult to do that. I'm sure there's some criminal out there who has a better mind than me that maybe could figure it out, but the poll workers are really watching, and they're watching that machine, and they're making sure that there's not extra ballots that are being slid in. So I think Catherine.
I just wanted to add one more thing about the absentee ballot counting. It's all done in public in front of everybody. So, you know, I wish everybody understood that, because that it's all on the up and up. It's all accountable. It's all transparent. So I think that's important too. Yeah. Thank you.
Absolutely. And even I will take it a step further. In Oneida County, we do not have any central count locations, you know, but there's always the Milwaukee drop that happens at 1 in the morning, and everybody's convinced that Milwaukee somehow miraculously found 100,000 ballots or whatever random number they give. That Milwaukee drop is, it's called a central count location. And so in Milwaukee, because there are so many more people, can you imagine if their poll workers had to, while doing the in-person voting on election day, also had to manage their absentees? You're going to have errors. You're going to have people that are distracted. And so in Milwaukee County and in a couple of other counties throughout the state, because of their numbers, they do what's called the central count location. And so all their absentees go to a different location. But in the state law currently, and this would probably be a change that I think would not be bad for the larger municipalities to take advantage of, they can't start counting absentees until election day. You know, so the thought that a clerk is out there counting absentees somewhere all by herself and stealing votes is not accurate. They can't count till election day. And so those central count locations start processing those in the case of November 2020, over 100,000 absentee ballots on election day. That takes time. And so that big dump that occurs at 1 in the morning is not 100,000 votes that were just found. It's the votes that they've been putting through their machine since 8 o'clock that morning. They just finally finished at 1 in the morning. And so, you know, so we don't deal with that in Oneida County. Our poll workers do our absentee voting at the polling location, but even those central count locations are open to the public, and you can have observers, and you should have observers going in and watching that. Let me make sure I'm catching them all. All right, is sending in a photocopied absentee ballot valid? It is not. The only people that can do a faxed or emailed absentee ballot are military electors. Aside from that, nobody else can send in a photocopied ballot, can fax a ballot back, can email a ballot back. You have to use the original ballot that was sent to you from your clerk. A number of years ago, clerks could email a ballot to somebody. They could print it and initial it, and do the whole thing and send it back, and then the poll workers would remake their ballot. I don't recall what year it was, but that law was changed, and now only military electors can do that. Are poll workers restricted in any way from talking about their roles? I felt bad when poll workers and clerks were maligned and their ethics were questioned in the past. So we are not restricted in talking about our roles. There's certain information that we have access to, mainly the clerks, but the poll workers also, that we can't share. But we're not restricted from talking about our role, from talking about how elections are run at our municipality, and from defending ourselves. And like I said, I have spent hours on the phone talking to people and trying to defend clerks. And my husband said, "Bring this up, Tracy, bring this up." And I laughed and said, "I don't know." But as I said already, I'm a Republican. The Republican Party sent a very threatening letter out to all clerks in the state of Wisconsin last week, and they got a very nasty email back from me about that, because our poll workers and our clerks have been run through the ringer for the last 18 months, and it has been exhausting, and it's difficult to hear our ethics being brought into question constantly, our honesty being brought into question constantly. And I don't think I can say this enough about Oneida County. We have an amazing group of town clerks that work so hard to make sure our elections are run fairly and honestly. I get emails from the town clerks leading up to elections constantly verifying, Tracy, can you make sure, I want to make sure I'm doing this right. I want to make sure I'm not violating something. I want to make sure this voter gets to vote. And so we are talking to each other constantly, making sure that we know the latest laws and we're following those laws, and our poll workers are following those laws. And, so I think it's important that people hear that. So any other questions? Anything I've said to tick anybody off that you want to go over? I don't see any hands.
Tracy, yeah. I'll just throw a little comment in, taking off from what you just said about nonpartisan behavior and commitment, but recognizing the value of political parties. Usually at the beginning of our presentations, at least often, we recite our nonpartisan policy at the beginning. And as an organization, the League of Women Voters, we are nonpartisan in thought, word, and deed when we speak on behalf of the League. We are a political organization. We advocate for positions that we have arrived at by consensus, but over time and across localities, those positions often vary with regards to how they coincide with a particular political party position. Furthermore, as individuals and members of the League, we can and should speak as partisans as individuals, and we're encouraged to run for both nonpartisan and partisan public office. So when you speak to us, Tracy, you can proudly announce that you are a Republican.
And I am, and I want to jump on that. I've over the years, and many of you know, my husband is the sheriff. Over the years, we have both been questioned how we can serve in our office and be Republican. We are very proud Republicans, and I will happily debate any of you on some of the issues between our two parties. But we both feel very strongly that while I am partisan in my personal beliefs, when I come to my office, both at the town and at the county, I am very nonpartisan. It is not my job to decide who gets to vote or which political party gets represented more. It is my job to make sure that everybody, regardless of their politics, gets to vote. And I think that's extremely important. And, the League of Women Voters, that's one of the things I respect, because I do believe that many of you are obviously have political beliefs. I would hope as voters you do. But as the League of Women Voters, as I've had conversations over the years, it is always approached as a very nonpartisan group. And I respect that. And that's how I run my office, here. But I am definitely proud to be a Republican. That does not mean I fall in line with them on everything, like sending out threatening letters to town clerks.
And Tracy, I will remember your comment that you would be willing to debate anybody about.
Absolutely.
Because the League of Women Voters absolutely believes in the importance of vigorous debate, vigorous presentation of all sides of every issue, because that in the end is the only way to come to the best decision about public policy in general, and also about how we decide to vote. So
yes, absolutely.
And speaking of which, those last details about the processing of absentee ballots were very apropos and an excellent way to finish off, because they provide reassurances about the validity of absentee ballots. And we're going to continue to need to use absentee ballots because our population is scattered. We're getting old and have increasing difficulty getting to the physical polling place. And there's always the weather, all that. So we need the absentee balloting process, and we need to know that those ballots will be counted and that the process is secure. So if anybody else is sparked to additional question or comment, pipe up, but I will say, excellent presentation, Tracy, and you sparked excellent audience participation. You're the epitome of dedicated citizenship and public service. So thanks so much. The League loves to lift up, that's the current phrase du jour, by which we mean we want to support, assist, and learn from our municipal officials. And I learned a few new things, clarified others, and particularly reinforced my confidence that our clerks in charge thoroughly know the voting procedures and process and are willing and able to patiently explain those things to current and future voters. So, as a reminder to everybody, this program is being recorded to be added to our YouTube channel and our collection of resources that can be found on our website. To access those resources in either place, all you need to remember to type into the search box is LWVNOW, and the magic search engine will bring you up the right choice to click on. Also, a last minute pitch that the next League of Women Voters of the Northwoods meeting program will be on April 12th at 1 p.m., at which Don Dunphy, the former DA for Lincoln County, will discuss the Second Amendment to the Constitution and the status of the ERA. And attendees, your homework in the interim is to pull up and read the Second Amendment. All right, any other comments? Parting messages?
Well, thank you guys for inviting me. I very much appreciated it and appreciate the comments. I will just say, if any of you have any questions, my email is on the Oneida County website. Feel free to shoot me an email if you have any thoughts afterwards that you want to check back on.
Thank you, Tracy.
Absolutely.
Excellent.